everybody, we're the Margaret Newman group. My name's Nancy White.
I'm Kelly Galbraith.
I'm Mallory Otto.
I'm Jefferson Peak.
Okay, we're going to start off by talking about Margaret Newman's education and influences. Newman graduated from Baylor University and then spent time taking care of her mother during an illness. She then attended the University of Tennessee in Memphis to pursue her BSN. After graduating from UT, she was a clinical instructor there for a year. She then moved on to get her master's in medical surgical nursing at the University of California in San Francisco. After graduation, she became the director of the Clinical Research Center back in Memphis for a few years before pursuing her PhD at New York University, where she stayed after graduating and worked on nursing outlook and theory. Newman became a professor in charge of graduate studies at Penn State University. And in '84, she took a position as a nurse theorist at the University of Minnesota, where she spent most of her time and where she retired from. After retiring, she continued to work on nursing knowledge development through her writing and working with students and scholars around the world. Her work gave her many honors, and she had a lot of influences. Her first influence was her mother. After she graduated from Baylor, her mother was diagnosed with ALS, and she cared for her mother over a 5-year period. Not knowing the disease process, she learned to live day by day and fully immersed in the present. This disease made her realize two things. Simply having a disease does not make a person unhealthy. And time, movement, and space are in some way related with health, which increases connectedness and quality of relationships. Ida Jean Orlando's nursing approach inspired Newman to figure out what is meaningful to a patient, even in the shortest contact. Newman did a lot of research on this and what difference a nurse can make for a patient's experience. Martha Rogers was one of the main influences in Newman's theoretical perspectives. Rogers saw health and illness not as two separate realities, but rather as a unitary process. This theory helped Newman integrate her theories from taking care of her mother and her patients. The last influence was Bentov. Bentov viewed life as a process of expanding consciousness, which is where Newman came up with her theory. Here's Kelly.
All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about Margaret Newman's theory, health as an expanding consciousness. From here on out, we'll just refer to it as the HEC. Newman's theory of the HEC calls nurses to focus on that which is meaningful in their practice and in the lives of their patients through the following 4 areas. These 4 areas are really what her theory is all about, so you're going to hear them repeated throughout this presentation. The first area, expanding consciousness, a quote from Newman. Ultimate consciousness has been equated with love, which embraces all experience equally and unconditionally. Pain as well as pleasure, failure as well as success, ugliness as well as beauty, disease as well as non-disease. She refers to consciousness in that it is not limited to cognitive thought. Consciousness, as defined by Newman, is the capacity of the system to interact with the environment. The process of expanding consciousness is the process of becoming oneself, of finding greater meaning in life, and of reaching new heights of connectedness with other people and with the world. Nurses should realize that there is no past or future, there is only the present. It is important for nurses to practice from the center of his or her truth to be able to care for their patients. The second area is time and presence, another quote from Newman. The time experienced in a moment expands or diminishes with consciousness. If I am fully present, there is no time, only consciousness. Newman's earliest work pointed out the nurse's ability to quickly and effectively attend to the most important task for the patient and to engage in with the patients about what is most important to them on their journey to health. Only when nurses move away from the linear timeline to the here and now can they become truly present to patients in a meaningful way. Newman noted that artificial time of clinics and hospital shifts moves nurses away from the rhythm of this nurse-patient relationship. When nurses can move away from a Western sense of time, they can become more fully present to their patients. The last area, the third area, is resonating with the whole. Newman described resonance as the mechanism for acquiring essential information to guide nursing actions and to understand meaning in a patient's life. This allows the nurse to sense the unique situation and concerns for each patient. The nurse must let go of personal judgment about their patient and pay attention to the patient at their simplest level. The fourth and final area is attention to pattern and meaning. Nurses are able to be in relationships with patients, families, and communities in such a way that incites arising in their pattern recognition dialogue to shed light on potential actions. So now we're going to dive a little bit more into the HEC as it pertains to the patient. Although I've talked a lot about the patient already, because the HEC really is all-encompassing between the nurse, the patient, and the environment. The HEC perspective involves being fully present to the patient without judgments, goals, or intervention strategies. She talked a lot about being with rather than doing for, focusing on what is most important to the patient on their journey. And the word mutuality was brought up a lot. Mutuality of the nurse-patient relationship forms a mutual transformation, a transformation for the patient as well as for the nurse. She provided a nice example in the chapter about a 16-year-old who had previously been convicted of murder. He was placed in an adult correctional facility. He was meeting with a nurse researcher to gain insight of the patterns and meaning of the people and events in his life. He became blocked, couldn't really come up with a pattern or meaning of people in his life. So they met over a series of weeks. One week he walked in and the nurse was waiting. She noticed his movements seemed more controlled and labored. He sat with his arms tightly cradling his abdomen and his chest was expanding as though it were about to explode. The nurse chose to give him feedback about the way that he presented himself. And with this insight, he was quiet for a few minutes, and then he began to cry. Suddenly, he began to talk about a very painful family history. It became obvious that the experience of covering up the abuse had been also encompassing that his pattern had been suppressed. So by pointing out this pattern of him coming across as blocked, he was able to unblock the past, and then moving forward was able to present himself in a different way. The third area that I'm going to talk about is the meta paradigm as it has to do with the environment. Attention to pattern and meaning. The HEC perspective again talks about the attention to pattern and meaning. It is essential to the HEC that the belief of each person exhibiting a distinct pattern, which is constantly unfolding and evolving as the person interacts with their environment. Expanding consciousness. The process of expanding consciousness is characterized by the evolving pattern of the person-environmental interaction. Newman illustrated the consciousness as an interaction with the environment by illustrating starting with a rock. Rocks have little or no interaction with their environment, to plants, which provide nutrients, give off oxygen, and draw carbon dioxide, eventually to animals, which can interact freely, and then finally to humans, who can reflect, make in-depth plans regarding how they want to interact with their environment. Ultimately, we become spiritual beings on the spectrum's other end.
Hi, I'm Mallory. I'm going to be talking about the meta paradigm and how it relates to health. So going back to Margaret Newman's basis of her theory, she thought about health was an expansion of consciousness. So this not only includes the actual disease, but states in which disease aren't present in people. So she truly believed that people can experience health and wholeness in the midst of having a chronic disease. Disease is the expression of the behavioral patterns of this person, and those behavioral patterns encompass not only their emotional thoughts, spiritual beliefs, it encompasses how they present themselves, their appearance, their physical signs, how, kind of their body language, and these are present before they even get the disease itself. And curing the disease doesn't change the patterns of this person. And if illness is the only way these behavioral patterns surface, then this is kind of health for them. She thought that health is not the opposite of illness, but health and illness are manifestations of a greater whole. So it's all kind of encompassing of the same thing. And as nurses, our goal is to recognize the power in these behaviors and help them move to a higher state of health and consciousness. And this helps patients discover more meaning in their lives. So, she really thought that disease wasn't necessarily a horrible thing and people weren't necessarily defined by their disease, but that you could use those patterns to kind of help bring you to a different state of consciousness. So assumptions about her theory, she thought health is a unitary pattern. So this pattern includes that human beings are inseparable from the larger area that encompasses person, family, and community. Also within the person itself, mind, body, and spirit and emotion are not separate. They're all manifestations of the whole person. She thought of consciousness as the informational capacity of the whole. So the consciousness not only includes thoughts, but information that's actually embedded in the person. So in their nervous system, their immune system, and actually in their genetic code. And that pattern describes the human environmental practice. So a little bit what Kelly talked about with the patient interacting with the environment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about now application to advanced nursing practice. So I really think that this can be incorporated to really a big part of what we do as advanced practitioners, which is interviewing our patient and figuring out why they're here, what their symptoms are, and kind of what's going on with the patient. So it's really just forming a mutual partnership with the patient. Dialogue about all of the patient's life and what's going on with them and not just about their disease. We really want to tend to the meaningful experiences in the patient's life. This allows us to understand how this disease is affecting every aspect of their life and how areas of their life are affecting their disease. So discovery of how the patient interacts with the world. This allows for pattern recognition. So really gives us an insight into what patterns are developing, and we can therefore kind of point these out to the patient and work through these things with them. It allows us to attend a patient as a whole. It allows for the evolution of care as a transformative process. So, really listening to the patient and finding out how we can help them reach a state of wholeness, not only with their disease, which may or may not be curative, but with their experience as a whole. Margaret Newman really went back to when we enter a patient's room and we experience with patients to leave our judgments outside the door, to really be present with our patients so that we can fully understand their experience in the world.
Hi, I'm Jefferson, and I'm here to talk to you about this clinical application scenario, then go through strengths and limitations of her theory quickly. Most of the literature that I came across was describing how her theory could break down barriers of communication between patients and those that they love. One particular scenario was a patient that got some serious cancer, and with meetings with families, they understood that they had a mutual pattern that they needed to understand in order to break barriers and move forward. She felt like she was a burden to her family, and the family wanted her to know that she was not a bother, and that by moving forward with understanding this, they were able to understand her health pattern more effectively. The family moved along with her, and more open communication developed a pattern that was mutual that the family could then help her. Some strengths for this, for Newman's theory, are that it's not necessarily a negative thing to have a disease. First of all, Newman describes disease as meaningful, not necessarily a terrible thing, and that human beings are not confined by disease or defined by it. They can be extremely healthy and whole as an entity spiritually and as a human being, and not necessarily be a person with cancer. They can be a person and they can understand their cancer separately. This theory has international attention. It's gotten a lot of reviews from literature in Korea and Japan, Australia, New Zealand. It's definitely been embraced more fully in Eastern cultures, more than it has in Western cultures. And so there's a lot of expansion of her theory in the East. And another strength of this theory is that it can be interpreted creatively, that you can allow this into your own practice and adapt it to how you deal with your patients. Another strength is that it equates your progression as a human being with potential and progress and empowerment. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be in a state of disrepair if your pattern is not necessarily organized. So that kind of goes to limitations. It's also difficult for people, especially in the West, to understand this theory. It can be even considered to be a little bit of a hippie theory. You have to understand someone as a pattern and problem solve with this. When in Western cultures, we're very objective, pragmatic, physical, scientific. We like to see a problem, we like to remove it from the person, we like to fix it. And so in the West, it's a lot more difficult for us to be taking in and embracing the disease process and seeing it as meaningful instead of negative. We're always in it to fight the disease, fight cancer, fight things. And so this is a little bit different for people to embrace. Also, we have references here, and just want to say thank you very much for listening to our
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
presentation. Thanks a lot.